wonderful. So this is all about stress, this particular one. Of course, stress is a thing that exists in the world, and stress can be a thing that creates a lot of challenges at work, of course. So should we do a stress thing? Here we go. Ready? Say yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, opening discussion. Stress. What stresses you out?
Unmet expectations.
Unmet expectations. Say more.
Things aren't going the way that I wanted them to go or thought they would, and I maybe also feel like I get helpless in this situation.
Oh, yeah.
So I've heard, not myself.
And also I hear a little bit of like lack of control.
Yes.
Losing
yes.
control a little bit. Yeah. Good. What else?
Not having clear expectations.
So on the other side of the fence, not knowing what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah. In the same vein, to kind of help your thinking, how do you know when you are stressed? What do you notice? What's it like for you?
I pick at my fingernails.
Okay.
People notice it before I do.
Nice. What else?
Don't sleep good.
Don't sleep well. Yeah. That's one for me.
Irritable.
Well, we had us doing a little project with the leadership team, and one of them said, and I've been saying it ever since, she said she gets crispy. It's my new favorite thing.
I think for me, I start to see the world in win-lose. Who's gonna win, who's gonna lose?
Mm-hmm.
And what are they trying to take from me?
I sometimes will, it sounds so weird, but I'll over busy myself. Like I'll just like, so I think that's an avoidance. I just like over busy myself in other areas.
I start to get worried. I think like I'm wasting time, and then I'll have to like make a plan and like make sure I'm not just get tasks done. And but yeah, I think just kind of like that fear that I'm wasting time bothers me a lot.
I make lists.
Oh yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's when I feel really out of control. I
me
just
too. But I get task oriented, like
Yeah.
really change to concrete more than conceptual.
Well, and what's interesting, so I'll kind of again flip back and forth here, but so we do a lot of executive assessments, and a typical question we would ask in the interview portion is this, how do you know when you're getting stressed out? How do you know when you need to really take some time to take care of yourself? And what do you suppose, these are high-level executives, what do you think a common response is?
I thrive under stress.
That would be a good one. Yeah. It's typically something like, well, I go for a walk. Well, that's what you do in response to being stressed, but what are the signs? And it's quite a process usually to get people to actually figure out. Right? So just kind of a piece of this. A lot of people, because so many of us just aren't that aware, and we don't really know ourselves all that well, and we don't allow ourselves particularly to access maybe some of the messy stuff, really don't know how stressed out they are. A lot of people aren't really accessing that, and so just helping people figure out what are your signs, how do you know, and therefore how can you get out in front of it for it, you get real crispy, like I do. Stress is this thing that is a word that we use all the time, but what is it? Like, what do we actually mean? So there's several definitions of stress out in the world and in the internets. One is physical, mental, or emotional strain or tension. Physical, mental, or emotional strain or tension. Another one, a condition or feeling experienced when a person perceives that demands exceed the personal and social resources the individual is able to mobilize. That one's a lot of words. So what comes up for you as you see these, just in general? Any reactions? Feelings, emotions?
So that is kind of how I feel helpless when I feel helpless.
So helpless, yeah. Sure. What other words? Emotions, feelings, stuff? Overwhelmed. Unable. Right? So what I'm hearing is mostly negative. Right? There's very much with these, and with the word stress, there's a negative connotation to it. And how many are familiar with the Yerkes-Dodson principle? Right? What this says actually is that there's a correlation or a relationship between kind of our performance, how well we do, and the level of stress. And so we kind of have these three categories. Well, first off, what is this thing? Anyone remember?
Bell curve.
That's the bell curve, right? Normal distribution. Tim calls it what?
Most beautiful picture.
Yeah,
Yes.
beautiful picture in the world. Right? And so here's another example. This isn't personality, but we still can understand humans through this beautiful picture, right? So on the bottom here is our level of stress. On the left is our performance, right? So the higher, the better the performance. The higher over here, the more stress we're experiencing, right? So if we're not really feeling anything, right? Our performance, right? See the curve here? It's just, there's nothing's happening, right? It's not important. Who cares? Meh, what's the big deal, right? But as a little bit of stress increases and we find ourselves in this eustress stage, right? That gives us a little bit of push, like, yeah, I should try my best at this, right? This is something that's really important. I want this to go really well, right? And that's what we call kind of the good stress, right? Where it matters enough that I'm gonna just kind of put a little bit of extra energy into doing my best, right? Then we reach this point, though, where eustress switches over to distress. And that's where we go from that optimal amount of stress to where we're probably showing up, bringing our best, to, whoa, this is too much. I'm starting to get crispy. I can't do it. I'm spinning, nothing's working. I gotta calm out, right? So I think it's important to kind of point this out for folks because it's the notion that, well, stress is bad, right? Actually, we need a little bit of stress. We need a little bit of almost even anxiety, sometimes people call it, right? To say, yeah, this is important enough for me to bring my best, okay? So when we go back to this, I kind of question some of these as the best definitions of stress, right? Because physical, mental, and emotional strain or tension. Well, what about eustress, right? Condition or feeling experienced when a person perceives that demands exceed the personal and social resources of the individual. Well, that wouldn't define eustress. That would define distress. Right? So when we really want to get a nice, comprehensive definition of stress, who should we ask? Well, we should ask the psychologists. So the APA, the American Psychological Association, says that stress is the physiological or psychological response to internal or external stressors. So stressors, that's the incoming, right? That's the stuff out here. Stress is all kinds of stuff, like how we interpret that, what does it mean, what's the impact, and then how am I going to respond to it, right? And that's going to look different for everybody. So really thinking about these three different components, so we have the environment, what's going on around us, and then we have the psychological pieces, right? So my psychological values, my self-concept, what are my psychological resources, how much energy do I have to respond to this? And we can't escape the physiological component of stress. So physiologically, what happens for you when we're reaching that distress piece? Anybody?
Heart rate increases.
So your heart rate increases.
Blood pressure.
What you remember?
Sweaty hands.
Sweaty hands.
Fidgets.
What's that?
Fidgets.
Fidgets. Does anyone's heart rate decrease? Mine does. So there isn't a right way or a definitive way. It's how we're wired, right? Some people, their arousal means hyper. Some people, their arousal means hypo, right? So we can react in different ways. I think that what's helpful for people just to think about is, what's my different physiological reaction to eustress? So the good stuff, a little jazzed up, right? And then what's it like for me in my body when it starts to transition into distress? Right? And again, there's no right or wrong answer. And so when we, of course, it wouldn't be a session without this quote, right? Every human being is like every other human being, like some other human beings, and like no other human beings, right? And so how this relates to stress, and I'm going to pass it off here pretty soon, is that everyone experiences distress and stress and eustress and all the stresses, right? That's just a part of human nature, right? What things are stressful and how we respond to them and what's appropriate or inappropriate might be more subgrouped by cultural experience. But I'm going to pass it off to Tim, and what he's going to talk about is that there's also individual differences related to stress.
So this is some of the research using discovery on kind of how we can understand stress. So we look at some of the data, and we've done some of our own kind of internal research in working with organizations, kind of collecting some data on kind of performance outcomes and when people are performing really well and maybe when they're not, and what is like the role of kind of personality, particularly personality change under stress. How does that kind of play a role in predicting performance, so to speak? So we have found that the way that people change under stress, when we look at all these profiles that are in our system, we can see the score on a good day versus the score on a stressful day. You've all looked at your facilitator reports and you see how you kind of change. And I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, but the way, there is no discernible pattern, there's no predictive pattern about how people change under stress. I think one example, would be kind of looking at that hospitality scale. We have a couple people on our team that when you look at just their average profile, we're all about like 68th, 69th percentile in hospitality, about 4 or 5 of us are. And 3 of us, when we get under stress, go up. 3 of us go way down, right? And you can actually see that play out. And we all kind of discovered that as a team, and we're like, oh my gosh, that explains so much, right? And I'm one of the people that actually go up. And some of my colleagues in the back are people that go down, right? And we didn't really know this before. And you know, we get stressed a lot because, well, if you're working, you will. But when we get into that distress mode, we start to kind of change a little bit in how we relate to one another, right? And Casey says he gets crispy, right? Well, one of my values is like connection and acknowledgement. And when he's getting crispy, I'm not getting acknowledgement. Is he meaning to do it? No, he's just operating under that stress profile. And then I start to tell a story. Oh, he doesn't want me around. I start telling stories to myself about what he's trying to do to me. None of that's true, right? But
Usually.
no, I can't. I knew it. I am 99th percentile on skeptical, on good days and on stressful days, so that never changes. So I guarantee you that you're all telling stories about me to yourself. I know it, convincingly. But what we found, first finding, the way that people change under stress is totally 100% unique to them. And it's so fun and so fascinating to like discover that. Ooh,
Nice.
name of the tool. Yeah. Okay. Here's the other finding when we start looking at performance data. How much people change and how they react and respond has a lot to do with how they are engaged at work. And we'll kind of unpack that part. So first of all, that first finding, idiosyncratic stress reactions. So here's a profile, they change this way. Here's another profile, they change a whole other way, right? You all looked at yours, you see that you change one way. I know the example as a team. So we flip-flop all around like fish out of water. Which is true. Second finding, right? So what's the impact that stress change has on job performance or engagement at work? So we've actually done some smaller studies, but looked at people at work, and we kind of create these 2 groups so we can see how does group A do in this study versus group B. So group A, we call it the business as usual group. So we don't give them any insight into how they change, right? They're just flying blind. So they might be a team like ours. You know, the hospitality flips all this. We don't do anything with them. We just let them go as normal, okay? And we look at their profiles though, and we see how much do they change. So if you notice kind of on your profiles, you probably see a few scales where you have like wild swings, right? So I'm this way on a good day, but I'm way over here on a not so good day, right? And so the more wild swings people have, right, across their whole personality system, we call that stress impact. Stress has a massive impact on their kind of personality and ways of being. So the bigger that impact, that changes, we actually can measure that and get a score, right? How much do I change under stress? And the more they change under stress, the less engaged and high performing they are. When we don't do anything, right? When we don't give them self-awareness, when we don't give them tools to like get all this stuff, right? So the higher the stress change, the lower the performance. The lower the stress change, right, the higher the performance. So that's called an inverse correlation, right? This is called a Venn diagram. The overlap there. So higher the stress change, lower engagement. Lower the stress change, higher the likelihood they're going to be engaged. When we don't do There's hope though. But here that's kind of summarizing. When we don't do anything, bigger stress change, lower engagement, lower performance, the less likely they are to stay on the job, right? Kind of underlying this why? Well, our behavior gets really inconsistent, right? And the more inconsistent our behavior is, the harder it is to like relate to people, and the harder it is for people to relate to us. I don't know what they're gonna get, right? You do know that you're gonna always get skeptical, Tim. That one doesn't change for me. But I do trust people, or 4 of the 5. It's a joke. Okay, so the more inconsistent our behavior is, the harder it is to relate to us, the harder it is to support us. Right? I don't know what you need. I'm a boss, and one day I get this, the next day I get that. What does this person need, right? It's gonna hook things for me that, oh, I can't help this person, right? I don't know anything. It's also harder than to challenge us effectively, right? And what we know from the research is that to really do well, you need an environment at work that is high support and high challenge, right? We have another little breakout around all that stuff. So the hope though is when you start to incorporate some intentional practices around self-awareness and kind of group sharing and helping the manager and the employee start to understand each other, we call that alignment, right? So this other group is the intentional group, okay? So what we actually did to create this intentional group is we did 2 sort of main interventions. One, to build the manager alliance, is we simply gave them basic training on how to use the day 1 conversation guide. That's a report that you can generate from the system when you have 2 people's discoveries. And you can see the manager and the employee. And it just walks them through how to have a conversation about each other, right? And it gives them real practical questions. So if they can read, they can do this effectively, right? So we had them do that. And then we actually didn't do a ton of deep work here. We just said, have a conversation with your employee about what's it like for you when you get stressed. We didn't use the tool, we didn't do much there. We just talk about how do you change when you're under stress, right? And do it in a safe way that you can share this information simply for your manager to help get to know you better. So they did those things, not a lot of work. So we put those people in the intentional group. And so what we actually found here is that when people did this well and spent time on this, and when they had a good conversation around stress, they did these things, that the more they did this, the more their engagement went up. And the impact of stress, or how much someone changes under stress, completely washes out. So what this is saying is the antidote for really anybody who changes wildly under stress is to be seen, heard, and known by their boss. And when they get that, all the adverse effects of how much I change under stress, they all go away in terms of predicting my performance. And they get replaced with what we call protective factors, right, that actually increase my likelihood of doing well in the job. So it's not really just about what do I bring in the door, but it's what am I bringing in the door, what am I doing about it, and if I do some really key things, I can actually have a really high likelihood of performing well. Does that kind of make sense? Say yes.
Yes.
I'm a good copycat. So the more open the dialogue, the higher the likelihood of engagement, the higher the likelihood of performance, the higher the likelihood that we're going to have a long tenure. So if they don't have an open dialogue, and the manager gets the report and just says, I'm going to go through the motions, I don't really care about this, blah, 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 they're not going to do well, right? You have to want to, as a manager, actually have the open dialogue. And here's what really the principle is, and it makes so much sense. The more understood our behavior is, right, the more understood I feel, the more understood I am, right, the more understood, the more I understand my people, the easier it is for me to relate to them, the easier it is for me to support them, the easier it is for me to effectively and appropriately challenge them. Right? they get support and challenge, they're gonna do well, right? So it's really, how can we kind of turn the lights on this in a good way? So being seen, being noticed, being heard, those are all good things. Right? And if we can all get to a place where we're working together, that being seen and noticed is a good thing, all my talents can come out. So on the personal effectiveness report, how can you know your signs? How can you kind of take that awareness even deeper? Well, on the personal effectiveness report, which is inside of the facilitator report, but you can also generate that on its own, you can work with groups and teams and people on that, what's called that derailers page. So what the derailers page is, kind of builds on this concept or understanding, this truth really, that there are highly effective, like super effective, or am I going to probably tend to the less effective expression?
What level of stress?
Yes, Chad. Good. That is an important qualifier. When I have left eustress and entered distress. I'm glad you asked or said that. When I'm out of eustress and into distress, right? And I'm in distress. What's the likelihood that my prominent characteristics are really going to be used effectively? Like 1%. Way less than just a coin flip. Right? The chances are when I'm in that distress mode that my prominent characteristics are actually going to start kind of working against me. So that derailers page looks at the individual's prominent characteristics as they report them when they're under stress. So your really strong red bars, right? Looks at those and it kind of explains, puts some words around what it might look like, how it might kind of morph, right? We call it, and you all know that you're going to be certified, can use this pet name for this section too. We call it the hot mess page, right? So what kind of hot mess do I look like right now? And we all have a hot mess page. Actually, we all have two hot mess pages, right? And my hot mess looks different than your hot mess, right? So it's really helpful actually to talk about it that way because it's kind of approachable, right? So helping people understand we're all that way. We all get to be a hot mess. How it looks is different. So the way the page works is, we'll kind of go through this, but on that enthusiasm drive vector, the high yellow, this top one, right? Remember the aspect of our personality that seeks change, right? When we become a hot mess, if we're really high on seeks change, that can turn into, well, hang on. So this person's profile, they're below the 50th percentile, so they're stronger to the left side, which is seeks routine. You'll see that's a 49. Confusing one to start with, we'll get there. So they are at the 49th percentile on seeks change, which means they're at the 51st percentile on seeks routine. So if they were really far to the left on seeks routine, what can happen when you seek routine really strongly and you get to your hot mess state, seeking routine can turn into actively resisting any change, right? Does that make sense conceptually? So this particular report, that's not a potential derailer for that person, becoming resistant to any change. Just looking at it, why do you suppose we know that? What's missing here? The box. Yep. So that box says, look at this one. That's a potential derailer for this person. So here, back to the hot mess stuff, right? So high, this person, really high trust when they're under stress. So their red bar, under stress, super high on trust on that agreeableness factor, right? What can happen, right, when trust gets, when that characteristic gets displayed in maybe less effective ways, right? It can turn from trust into maybe being a little naive, right? And I gave away my trust too freely, to someone who didn't earn it, and or maybe I'm impression, right? So it's not that this person is naive, right? We're not saying that you're naive and labeling them. But what we're saying is, watch out for this wonderful trait in you, which is trust. Watch out for it turning into something that kind of gets in your way a little bit. Right? Does that make sense?
I've got a quick question.
Not
Trust is one of my potential derailers, but it looks like maybe because it's so low,
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
different.
Yeah. So the way these bars are presented is simply what's the right side description of trust? Are you at the 99th percentile on trust? That'd be super high. And if you're really high, watch out for naivete. That could be the oh no, right? If you're at the first percentile on trust, be me, right? Are you closer to me?
I'm 10.
Oh, you like have 10 times more trust than I do. That's great. Right, so you're at the 10th percentile. So you'd be at the 90th percentile on skeptical, right?
Yeah, it's a suspicion.
Yeah, so skeptical, that can when you're in eustress, skeptical can be helpful, right? You can be looking at a situation and saying, hey, wait a minute, let's just cover our bases here. When us skeptics get into distress, right? So this page says, well, okay, we're at the 10th or 1st percentile in trust, we're pretty stinking low. What is, for us skeptics, what does the distress version of skepticism look like? What could it look like? And why don't you read it?
Suspicion.
Suspicion. So my skepticism, which can be helpful in eustress, turns to suspicion in distress. Those of you who've worked with me long enough, have you ever seen that happen? Right? So impulsivity, if you're low, actually that's high. So impulsivity, which is kind of letting my emotion help me under eustress, can be really kind of fun, right? You get impulsivity under distress, it can turn into being uninhibited, unbounded person, right? There you go. So you can actually see in other people their personality when they get distressed. You can see the shift, right? And actually we can see it in others better than we can see it in ourselves. So being open to emotion, right? Emotional absorption under eustress, like open to emotion, letting them come in, being a sponge for them, can turn into emotional sensitivity. And it's like, take it all. Really hypersensitive to all the emotions of them. So every trait or every system aspect has a eustress version and a distress kind of version, whether you're high or low. So that's really how you read this. And if you're working with a coaching client or a group even, to kind of speed it up for people, once they get the concept of under eustress, good stuff, under distress, more likely to be the less effective version, you can point them to this page in the PE report and just have them look at the traits or aspects that have a box around it. If it doesn't have a box around it, what it's saying is that's probably it's not going to show up one way or the other too much. So whoever this is, how many issues do they have to work on? 1, 2. So you got 8 traits that they kind of want to take a look at, right? And depending on the circumstance and what's going on under distress, all 8 things may be showing up, maybe just 1 thing, 2 things, I don't know. But that's kind of what you get to do with them, is work through that bit of stuff. So that's how you can kind of know your signs. Make sense? You think of applications? Someone that you want to run this on? So you get 2 pages, and they're presented in the Cyplex format, right? So they're organized with the vectors and the colors. So the self-awareness activity is, given what you know about yourself, right? What are your prominent personality traits? Given what I know about myself, what are my prominent personality traits?
Hi everyone again. Thanks, Tim. So we're gonna spend a little time with yourself first. And what I want you to do, and you can look at this in a couple different ways. So on your reports, you all have this section, and what this section does is it shows you kind of where you might be at your best versus when you're experiencing distress. And one of the things that we're always curious about with that is where are the substantial flips, right? So for this person at their best, they're pretty high on conscientiousness. Under stress, they basically flip to the other side. That's one spot you can look at that just to kind of get some clues about yourself. The other spot then would be the derailer pages, which give you some more behavioral clues into how some of those extreme shifts might start to look a little less helpful. Okay? So what we want you to do is take some time and just kind of think about and write down some thoughts on these questions. So what are kind of your prominent traits, and this could be in the derailer section, that maybe when you're under distress can get in the way from time to time? And more importantly then, how might that impact the group or other people? Now we're gonna have so much fun embracing our hot mess selves, right? So I want you to now take your yellow piece, and you can have all the colors you want, and kind of do a little depiction of what your hot mess self looks like. Now, I want you to flip over your yeller page. So this is you under distress, and I'll show you mine too. Now I want you to in your report, go to page 6. On the bottom of page 6, you're going to see your psychological values. So you're going to see certainty, acknowledgement, information, connection, and ambition. So the question I'm going to pose to you, and what I want you to illustrate on the back of this, the other side, is, in order to help yourself out of your messy stuff, what do you need from the group? And some of your clues are going to be in that psychological values section. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Kind of list it or draw it?
Whatever you want to do. No
Okay.
rules. Just don't do it wrong. Folks, right into self-protection mode here. Here's what we're gonna do. One at a time. Is that like in New Orleans?
What?
We're gonna, so you're gonna talk about, show us your hot mess self. And again, I wanna clarify why we're doing that, right? Because it's not a shame thing, right? We wanna celebrate it and own it. Because the more that we celebrate and own it, the less the less power that stuff has to have, right? So we're gonna celebrate and own it. But then we're gonna talk about, on the flip side, what is it that you need from the group, or others in general, but we're pretending we're having a team group here, to get to that space. get back to that spot. Okay. And as you're doing that, I'm going to help you kind of connect those two sides, but we kind of want to see what you've come up with so far for that, what you need section. Okay. Looks like you want to go first. Okay. Hit it.
Get it over with. Alright. Hot mess.
Tell us about it.
So what happens is there's things that are going on and I zoom in, so this is like a magnifying glass on just one and I ignore the other stuff that needs to happen. I feel the time crunch and I forget the concept of time kind of feels both like I need to get it done now and I don't have enough time.
Uh-huh.
And it all feels like it's just one big storm coming.
I can feel it. Yeah.
So what I need from the team is help me break it down and identify kind of, here's some things that, you know, when you have these things floating around, here's the list, here are the things that we can help and work on together, or that's my group of people that I need to connect with, and being together and working through some things together to identify, like help me to zoom out and see that it's not just this one thing, but there's a few things that here's kind of ideas of prioritizing them.
Can I ask, how did you come to that? Deciding what you needed there?
Can you ask that question?
I sure can. What information did you use to come up with this, which makes a ton of sense?
Some of the report stuff on page 6.
Yeah,
And-
and specifically what scales?
The values, psychological values, just kind of looking at the ones
Which
that
one?
had, oh, you want me to be specific?
Yeah.
Certainty piece is
Okay.
my, this.
Got it. Makes sense. And that's gonna help you get back to, which one are you?
And the,
Top right.
yep.
So how does that connect with my needs? So this, I want to take just a moment to teach, is those 5 psychological needs scales, I promise you, are going to become your favorite because they are the key to understanding pretty much everything that's going on for people, right? So remember, what those are connected to is, what does someone need in order to feel secure in their identity, right? Why is it that we go into self-protection mode?
So our identity is uncertain.
Because we don't feel secure in our identity, right? That's the only reason. If we felt secure in our identity, there's nothing to defend, right? So what is it that someone needs to feel secure in their identity? We go right to those scales, okay? So for me, particularly when I'm in my, red hot coal mess, I need to feel, and that's the thing with the needs, right? They're subjective in their satisfaction, right? They're all feelings, right? And that's why it's so subjective, right? So I have a high need for ambition. What that means is I need to feel like progress is being made, right? And that's only I can feel that, right? So, you know, someone could give me, well, look at all the things, but it doesn't feel like it. Doesn't matter, right? The second thing is my high need for connection. For me, and this is the subjective nature of the values, to me what that really means is I need to feel like I am part of something that matters, right? So it's actually less a one-on-one connection for me. To me, it's more of a, am I part of something that matters, right? And I know that when I'm feeling particularly sort of insecure, lacking purpose, blah, hot mess, it's like, what's the point? And I don't feel like I'm part of something that matters, right? So what I would ask the team in those two moments is help me know what kind of progress is happening and help me know to be part of something that matters. And I get to be part of you all. So last piece on this, again, kind of going back and forth between the things. So when you're thinking about for yourself, and then that translates into your clients, when you're thinking about those psychological need scales, right? So whether it's bringing you out of the hot mess, bringing you out of self-protection, bringing you out of the darkness, right? So values connection. That's what we know in terms of the baseline piece of information. Okay, so this person values connection. But remember, what's the third clause of our Murray quote?
Different than
Everyone
everyone.
is different, right? So what that looks like for each individual person is going to be completely different, right? And that's where we'll talk about more this afternoon. We lead with our curiosity. So what does that needing connection look like for you? How does that become satiated, right? What is ambition? How do you know when that's being met, right? 'Cause we can't define that for someone, right? So the thing I would leave you with for lunch, I didn't do it because I wanted to show you through my example. As you think about, again, the flip side of that, of how do you go from hot mess to that, so I have a high need for information. Well, just kind of think about, what does that mean for me? How do I know that I have enough information? What kind of information do I need? How does that play out? I have a high need for acknowledgement. What does that mean for me, right? Do I need a little note from time to time? Do I need a lighting special with a spotlight? Yes. But what does that look like for me? How we would normally play this out is, of course, to then go in to talk about this. So often when we're under stress, then we go into the self-protection mode. I typically, depending upon the thing, will show the blame video because it just helps people get it on another level. What questions do you have about stress? Or anything?
So when you're teaching this part, what are some of the common things that you see, or does people get distracted or caught up on certain things?
Yeah, I think something that constantly needs that follow-up piece, and we didn't need to do it with you all because you got it pretty good right away, is what's the distinction between what it looks like for me when I'm stressed and what I do when I'm stressed, right? Because it's the self-awareness piece, right? It's getting people to embrace their hot mess self. And it's knowing, right, it's that simple question, well, what are the signs in yourself? How do you know when you're stressed? What does that look like for you? Well, I go for a walk. No, that's how you respond to the stress, to try to get out for it. You know, well, I need to spend time alone. Well, that's probably what you do, but what's your impact on others? What's your hot mess self? Sometimes that takes a little bit
So
of...
how would you phrase that? There's
Sure.
a distinction between what you do and how you feel?
There's a distinction between what your behavior gets to and therefore the impact that you're having, right? And then what you do to try to get out of it. And what a lot of people want to do is just skip past their impact and, well, I have to go for a walk. Yeah, but what did you do before that that made you realize that you have to go for a walk? Because if you can know that part, that increases the likelihood that you don't have to get to that part necessarily. Right? And the more self-awareness, the further upstream we